Affairs, our partners and colleagues at NIUA, experts from civil society organizations, think tanks, academic institutions, etc. Before we begin the session, I would just like to set up one housekeeping rule. If I could request everyone to please silence their mobile phones because they tend to intercept with these mics. Thank you. So the session that we have planned today sits at the heart of something that we often understate when we speak about building resilient cities, and that's the livelihoods of the people who actually power our cities. India's cities are growing fast, and the informal economy constitutes the majority of its workforce. Now, there are various emerging questions that come up when we are to talk about building resilient cities, but there's always a fundamental one. I mean, how do we start building resilient cities in such a way that, that the informal workers that are working have easy access to credit or have upskilling avenues, they have social protection, and they can have climate-safe working conditions. Over the next 1 hour, we'll hear some of the most thoughtful voices that are working on these questions, from skilling, financial inclusion, to labor law, behavioral science, and the green economy. To open our session and set the context, I'm honored to invite Shri Satinder Pal Singh, Additional Secretary, Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, and Vice President, NIUA. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Very good afternoon to all of you. Can we have the presentation, please? So we have started in good time. Hopefully we'll have time for a question and answer session also after we've heard our eminent speakers. Next, please. So I'll briefly set the context before we invite our speakers to make their respective interventions. Now, we are all familiar with India's growth story, and urban India is what is driving our economic growth. And these, some of the figures, data that you can see here, 60 to 65% of the GDP is contributed by Indian cities. And it is expected to go up to about 70% in the next 10 years or so. And by 2036, it is estimated that India will house almost about 60 crore people. But it is that 66%, which is an interesting figure, where you see that the urban workforce primarily comprises of informal workers in 66, which make up 66%. And that is a huge number. So we're talking about street vendors, we're talking about construction sector workers, we're talking about gig workers, domestic workers, waste pickers, etc. They are the backbone of the urban economy, but unfortunately, they also are the least protected against shocks. Now, the slide puts two framings side by side. One is the urban opportunity, the other is the resilience challenge. We'll have to hold both of them in tension as we have our discussions today on this topic. So urban resilience, of course, is not just the resilience of the infrastructure. So we are talking about resilience of the informal workforce, their physical security, their financial security, etc. Next, please. Now, there's no single urban livelihood sector as such. It's a generally distributed opportunity, as you can see, across construction and real estate sector, MSMEs, and we have new emerging areas like the green economy, etc. Few numbers here are worth pausing on. The gig economy, it comprised 77 lakh workers in financial year 2021, and it is projected to reach 2.35 crores by 2030. The green economy is expected to generate 7.29 million jobs by financial year 28. And interestingly, with 40% of growth in Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities. So it is not a capital cities-centric sector. Home healthcare is projected to grow from USD 6.2 billion in 2020 to USD 21.3 billion by 2027. But the common thread here is not which sector. The important question is what determines whether a worker can actually enter any of these sectors. Because identifying an opportunity is not the same as enabling access to it. Now, this gap between the growing sectors and the workers' ability to enter, that is where most of the informal workers are stuck. Next, please. And the 4 conditions which can bridge this gap are, of course, access to credit, access to markets, skilling, and social protection. Now, government has built a significant architecture around these 4 enabling conditions. So, for example, we have the PM Swanidhi scheme run by NIUA, which essentially provides collateral-free working capital to street vendors. Similarly, there's PM Vishwakarma, which bridges the credit gap for traditional crafts people. The erstwhile NULM, National Urban Livelihoods Mission, that had followed a self-help group bank linkage model. We have a scheme, Nipun, which primarily upskills and certifies construction workers. The eShram portal links registered workers to various social security benefits, similar to what PM Swanidhi says Samriddhi does in case of, I think, 8 other different kinds of schemes. They recently implemented 4 labor codes. They extend minimum wage standards, overtime protection, and regulated working hours to categories of workers which were previously uncovered. And for skilling, we also have the PM Setu, which revamps the ITI networks through an industry-managed model. So these are the interventions of the government with a view to not really converge these 4 enabling conditions, but they're addressing many of them, or all of them, to some extent. And during our discussions today, I would be keen to hear how is it faring on the ground? What are the gaps that we can see, and how do the experts feel we can bridge those gaps? And we would also be interested in listening to our experts as to what does convergence on the ground actually looks like. So I think I'll stop here now, and so that we can request our esteemed speakers to make the respective expert interventions. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We now move to our panel discussion, and I'm pleased to introduce the moderator who will be steering the conversation today. Ms. Anju Dwivedi is an anthropologist who has spent nearly 3 decades working at the intersection of governance, service delivery, and urban resilience. She currently leads the Center for Sustainable Urban Livelihoods at NIUA. Her work has focused on vulnerable occupation groups and urban informal workers. I would like to introduce our 5 key speakers for the session. Our first key speaker is Shri S.R. Meena, General Manager at the Small Industries Development Bank of India, SIDBI. With nearly 3 decades at SIDBI, he has headed large branches and regional offices across the country. He currently leads SIDBI's Green Climate Finance vertical. What he brings to today's session is a banker's lens to a very practical question of how informal workers can access credit and build climate resilient livelihoods. Next, we have Dr. Sakshi Khurana, Senior Specialist for Skill Development, Labor and Employment at NITI Aayog. Her policy work has covered India's gig and platform economy and international labor mobility. She brings the government's perspective on how the skilling ecosystem needs to adapt urgently to the fast-changing sector demands. We are also joined by Dr. Sharon Barnard, Director of Research at the Center for Social and Behavioral Change at Ashoka University and faculty affiliate at JPAL. Her current work includes a large RCT in Jharkhand examining whether introducing life skills into government livelihood programs improves outcomes, or income outcomes to be specific. Our 4th speaker is Dr. Elena Samantroy, Fellow and Coordinator of the Research Center for Gender and Labor at the V.V. Giri National Labour Institute. She serves on a committee recommending a legal framework for domestic workers and on the task force for improving female labor participation under the Ministry of Labour and Employment. Our final speaker is Ms. Divya Gaur, Program Lead at CEEW. She works at the intersection of climate resilience and women-led micro-enterprises. She will bring us ground-level evidence on the green economy as a livelihood pathway and on what extreme heat is actually costing urban workers. Thank you. Over to you, Anju, to take ahead the session.
Thank you. So we'll begin our panel discussion. Just before that, I would like to mention that since I'll be giving 10 minutes each for the speaker, there will be a time check by our colleague. So that's the very most difficult part, but I think it's needed since we have a next session following this in this room only. So she'll keep the time check and will inform when the time, when anybody exceeds the time, but I think that may not happen. So let me just begin asking Shriram Meenaji, sir. Sir, considering that SIDBI has been playing a very instrumental role in facilitating credit to informal workers, what will be your suggestion to the banks and financial systems to facilitate these kind of loans more frequently so that people don't face challenges, especially informal workers when they face a lot of disruptions during disasters, etc. also? And what kind of special loans and support systems are needed so that informal workers can also buy some important assets that are needed for the livelihoods? And how these loans can be designed in a way that not only the business growth happens, but also people are able to absorb shocks during the crisis, when the informal workers face challenges of any kind of disruptions. So those are some targeted questions to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, NIUA, for being me here. So I will break your questions in three parts. First, how we can assess the loan requirement of a informal worker. Second, what products to suit their requirement. And third, what could be the safety net that is essential to save the worker's livelihood when something happens for his or her livelihood. So as far as the assessment is concerned, so we have to identify what are the challenges before the informal workers. Traditionally, these informal workers have been getting funding either from the family saving, friends and family, and third, if it is not available within the house, then the money lenders. And again, it is putting the higher interest rate burden on these workers and making their enterprise or their livelihood uncompetitive or problematic. So another challenge is the awareness from where to get the funding. And third challenge comes, he or she is not having any credit history. Banks wants credit history, he do not have credit history. Another challenge is they do not have the collateral requirement to be met because these workers are working from home, they are not built the asset, and banks ask the collateral security, and they want to mitigate their risk, so they don't have the security to provide. So basically, to address these change, the banking system is evolving, is still evolving. But still, there are some collateral assessment tools which can be used to fund these informal workers or micro enterprises. This can include that instead of depending on the traditional assessment method or traditional credit assessment method or credit their identity verification or credit history, the banks and financial institutions are now coming out with the, thanks to the GEM Trinity, this Jan-Dhan accounts made the banking system accessible to the workers, which was not accessible. Another, the identity proof, the Aadhaar has made the universal identity for them, and lot of data are available linked to Aadhaar. And mobile has provided them the digital transaction capacity and capability, and it is somehow making them fit for the financial inclusion. So bank are using and should use these innovative tools to assess the credit worthiness of the customer. Instead of depending on the balance sheet or the CIBIL score, they can have the bank statement, they can analyze the bank statement or the digital payment transaction list. That very well can clarify that, give the data, what is the volume of the business. So based on the volume of business in the digital mode or through account, they can assess the credit worthiness of a customer or a credit quantity of credit that can be provided to the workers. This will also help the worker to become more financial aware that the transaction is routed through bank, so they will be having the higher credit limit. And based on these data, if he is getting the funding, so because now the credit is assessed properly, so the rate of interest burden will also come down. That will also increase the repayment capacity of the gig workers. From the supply side, because the banks wants to secure their loan. So far, the segment which was not treated bankable, now this segment is treated the most bankable. Reason being, their ecosystem has been evolved, like credit guarantee fund, which is providing the guarantee for this loan, small loan up to 10 crore, the loan can be covered under credit guarantee. This is a very higher limit for the workers. But institution like SIDBI has also come out some risk sharing facilities for such micro entrepreneurs. Like we have come out with one of the scheme that is for the empowering of the nanopreneurs, small entrepreneurs. And if the banks and NBFC provide the loan to these nanopreneurs, we provide the risk sharing facility. If loan goes bad, a certain portion of that loan can be made good by SIDBI through that risk sharing facility. Number of young persons are also in the green space, and some of them are having the EV with them as a livelihood. So we also have one special scheme that covers the risk for the funding given by the primary lending institutions for purchase of the EVs. So such risk sharing facilities can be availed by these workers or by these micro entrepreneurs. The model should be, because we cannot compare the repayment behavior or repayment cycle with one of the traditional unit with the micro unit. So our scheme should be based on the capacity to pay. When there is a payment with me, I will pay. So scheme should be whenever you want to pay. So the bank should come out with such a scheme that the repayment is not built in such a way that it is constantly coming the repayment every month or every quarter, but it should come when there is the cash flow with the customer. The second model could be, because these workers or micro entrepreneurs need small machines. These machines are manufactured by some of the OEMs. If OEM have partnership, like SIDBI has done number of partnership with such OEMs, original equipment manufacturers, they purchase the equipment and bank pay directly to OEM. So they get the credit and we get the assurance that asset is being built up. Second model could be the asset is provided on lease, first on lease, and based on that can be converted to ownership. Lease come ownership model. If a certain installment are paid, that ownership will be transferred to the worker. So this way also, risk is being mitigated for the banks. Another question which Anju madam has asked, the safety net. We have seen the COVID and some disruptions when the livelihood of these workers or the micro entrepreneurs were affected greatly. So taking that experience, the scheme should have inbuilt features of the safety net. The safety net could be loan with insurance, maybe insurance of the livelihood, loan with credit guarantee, as we have discussed, and similar type of some safety net so that the social protection is also made available to them. In case of disruptions, they are not affected to that extent. And there should be some emergency line that is made available immediately when such disruptions are happened. Like we have recently come out with ECL GS5, that is for the MSME, but similar scheme could be for the workers or micro entrepreneurs, that when such disruptions happens, then credit line is easily available or a certain percentage of their credit enhancement is available on the tips. So, from the traditional assessment, we should move to the digital assessment. From the collateral-based funding, we should move to the cash flow-based funding with risk mitigation tools and inbuilt features of the social safety network in case of the such workers, and promoting of the joint liability concept that is also happening in the microcredit sector. So increasingly using of the joint liability concept, a group funding concept, so that something happens with one customer, other can make good of that. So this can have the better solution for these workers. Thank you. I will stop here because he is also saying that my time is over. So thank you so much. I will be happy to take questions if they allow me to answer.
Yes. Thank you, Meenaji. Very important points that you've made for the informal workers to withstand all kinds of crises. And especially the access to credit is the most, I think, challenging for the informal workers in the city. So thank you very much for giving us some valuable insights into it. Now, I would request Sakshi to, give us some insights on how, when we are looking at these emerging sectors, but there is also a whole ecosystem of skill. How this skilling ecosystem is adapting to these, emerging opportunities that was shown in the presentation also, especially the gig care, because these are, some upcoming frontiers which are opening a lot of opportunities for even women workers. And given that these informal workers have a constraint of time, and also they can't lose their wages, and they should move into the career progression, what are the operational pathways that you can suggest us, considering that you have been part of this vertical in NITI, which has been focusing on gig workers as well as on the skill side? Yeah.
Thank you so much, Anjuji, and thank you, Mahua and NIUA for inviting me here, Dr. Deepti and Additional Secretary, sir. As sir mentioned right in the beginning, urban areas are increasingly becoming centers of economic activity. And the different sectors that are emerging are also, there has been a change, especially in the past 1 decade, if you were to see. New occupations have emerged. There has been a change in demand for labor. And some of these sectors which you mentioned, the gig and platform sector, the care sector, and the digital sector, as well as the green sector, have been driving, in fact, the ILO describes these 3 sectors as mega trends for the future of work. And these sectors also somewhere provide pathways for skill development, for improving employment outcomes, as we know that a large part of our workers in urban areas are informal workers. They have their own distinct challenges. Gig and platform workers have very unique characteristics. Of course, they have advantages in terms of low barriers. Access is much easier in the gig and platform economy. You need assets, if you have a mobile phone, especially a smartphone, that in itself is, it might be enough to get you platform work. But this sector also has its unique challenges. There is no clear employer-employee relationship. These workers are part of so many different platforms, as we know. So that deprives them of social security, of regular incomes. So our urban economy and society needs to respond to the needs of these workers. Of course, skill development being one, which I'll talk about in detail, but also the challenges for these workers remain, basic things such as access to toilets, access to rest areas, access to networking spaces is what these workers need, and that is where urban planning, urban economy as well as urban society need to respond. Various stakeholders need to work towards it, not just governments but also housing societies have a role to play, civil society organizations have a role to play, platform and aggregators themselves have a very important role to play. Talking about skill development, we know that for gig and platform workers, their time, as you said, Anju ma'am, that time is critical. We need short-term courses for them. MSD has introduced some, Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship has introduced micro-credentials, short-term training courses specifically for gig and platform workers, which focus on training in financial literacy, in online transactions, in soft skills, and so on. There have also been a lot of MOUs. There is an emphasis, and going ahead, we need further emphasis on industry-led development. That skill development has to be responsive to the needs of the labor market and the industry. So recently there have been a lot of MOUs which the Ministry of Skill has signed with different platform aggregators, Swiggy, Flipkart, and so on, which will certainly give an impetus to platform-led skill training, which was one of the recommendations of our report, which came out back in 2022. Sir cited figures from our report that by 2030, gig workers are going to form 2.35 crore workers in the economy. Also, talking about the care economy, we know that the demand for workers, different kinds of work is also changing because change in demographics, change in family structure, and demand for care workers is increasingly becoming important for child care, for elderly care, for patients who are, who suffer from long-term illness and so on. There have been initiatives for care workers also, where NSQF courses are being encouraged for geriatric care workers, home care assistants. There are two sector skill councils, there's home care sector skill council and healthcare sector skill council, which are devoted to skilling of care workers. Our ITIs also have a specific focus on skilling for the green sector, skilling for semiconductors, EV, solar panels, and so on. Going ahead, the schemes which have been recently introduced and taken off, such as PM Setu, as Sir said, are focusing on these emerging sectors such as the green and care sector. Going ahead, it's important that skill training is responsive to industry needs. There is an emphasis on lifelong learning, and workers have better access to certifications and to upward skilling. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sakshi. This was very important, as we also in the ministry have been thinking that this is a very important component of skilling, which needs to be, aligned to the demands of not only the industry, but also the, for the workers who want to actually go up in the career. And we have been experimenting with the construction workers and Nipun scheme, which Sir was also saying. Thank you for your thoughts here. So I come to you, Dr. Sharon, with a very different perspective now, coming from the ground, based on your Jharkhand experience. So while there are lots of schemes and government thrust, as Dr. Sakshi was mentioning, but what are the behavioral factors also which shape people's, people's mindsets to enter into these emerging sectors, and what are the challenges that especially women workers face, if you have some experiences of that. Sometimes we think that maybe we are over-investing too much on skills, but, skills like hardcore skills required for the jobs, but what about the behavioral and the social norms, which are also very important for letting people enter these into these emerging sectors and perform. So your thoughts are welcomed on that, ma'am.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Anju, for the question, and thanks to the organizers for inviting me and to be part of this esteemed panel. I know I'm going to learn a lot, probably learn a lot more today than I offer you, but I will offer you what I have nonetheless. So, in terms of like entering into new things, we'd like to think that kind of workers are just fully rational. And if you tell them that there's a job and it pays this much, and these are what the qualifications are that you need for it, that people just kind of make that calculation and enter or not enter, right? But actually how we work is we set a limitation on ourselves first and then do those things. So we kind of construct a set of opportunities that we think are possible for us and then look at those dimensions, right? So the way that we set those limitations are based on like 3 factors mostly. The first is about like aspirations and identity concerns. So, we've known for a long time that having role models shapes people's idea and it shapes their aspirations about what they can personally do. And, we have, evidence from India that exposure to female role models, right, particularly local leaders and panchayats from along, this is kind of evidence that's 15 years old now, but still really resonates that, girls who grew up with, a sarpanch who is female because of a reservation think differently about themselves, and their families think differently about what the opportunities are for them because they have different role models. There's also really interesting experimental evidence from Orissa where they looked at job opportunities. Is that loud enough? I don't know which one to use now. Yeah. Both. Okay. So they did these nice experiments where they offered real job opportunities to people who are looking for jobs, but they kind of brought out a social dimension of like who this kind of person normally is. And so in their case, they were interested in caste, right? So they actually gave some signals about the caste of people who are desirable for jobs. And you'll be interested that, when they gave a signal that for a job, that it was the caste signal from that, if somebody thought it was kind of, inferior to their own identity, guess how much they had to pay more in order to get a person to accept that job? Okay? It's 10 times more. It's not a little more, it's not double, but you'd have to pay someone 10 times more than their actual wage to get them to do something that's against their identity, their identity of what they should be doing. Okay? And so when we have these new fields, we are not quite sure what the identities of those fields are going to be, right? Is the care economy purely female? Is, the green economy masculine and technical? So we have to be thinking about these things in advance, aspirations and identities. In terms of social norms, so aspirations and identity are mostly personal, like what I think I should be doing, right? Is this a job that somebody like me does? Social norms are if others around me find it appropriate for me to do that job. So again, some of these things have already been touched upon today. So does the job require like mobility that people think I shouldn't be, out in public transportation or late at night? Do I have to interact a lot with strangers? Does it change how much I dress? Does it change the hours at which I come and go from my house? So although there might be lots of new jobs that we're excited about creating, they may not be real options for people based on these kind of factors. And then the last one is more about perceived risks. So, I'll start by asking you a question, like how many of you think that you need to know more about AI for your future, for your career, right? I do. I think I need to know more. I think if I don't, I'm going to miss out on a lot, right? How many of you know that you can learn these skills online for almost free and in your home, right? We know that too. How many of you spent any time doing that last week, right? Good. There are a couple of you, good. I didn't, okay? And I think maybe some of you are in my boat. So looking at the perceived risks of entering something new, these kind of small frictions can dominate when they're in the near term, right? So when like training and upskilling are near-term costs and the benefits are uncertain in the future, that's where we tend to get ourselves stuck, right? And so we need to, make sure that we're trying to resolve uncertainties about the whole journey, not just the entry point in the journey of moving into these new sectors. And so that means like what we need to do is anticipate these things. When we're setting out, when government schemes are, being set out, a lot of what we do at Center for Social and Behavior Change is think about what's the last mile issue on that for the person who is supposed to take up the scheme, right? How do you get more people to benefit, right? To really leverage what's possible through all of these innovative schemes. How do you get them to do it? And so we have to anticipate in those schemes that these things are going to be an issue. So we have to design schemes differently and then, communicate and market them in a different way, and not just to the individual, but to the family and the community, to change the social norms about what's possible for individuals. So I have a nice, I think, nice acronym for you to, kind of remember if you're in one of these fields where you actually need to think about these things. And so we need to make the jobs imaginable, acceptable, and safe. So it's IAS, you'll remember, right? Imaginable meaning like there are role models, the path is laid out. Acceptable meaning your family and your community will agree to it. And then safe in terms of risks, right? So planning support, having peers around, and then helping people actually commit and do follow through, right? So that's on the getting somebody into something. And then on the second part of your question about soft skills, right? So I think in order to think about if we're over-investing or under-investing, it's a question of right now we think of skilling mostly as technical and then maybe a little communications, right? But what about broader life skills and soft skills? And so in order to think about investing more in them, we need to answer two questions. And the first question is, do these skills really matter? And then the second is, are they teachable? Yeah. And so the answer on both of those is actually yes. So we have evidence that they matter. If you look at the India Skills Report, if some of you have seen this, what they do is they actually measure skills of new graduates, and then they ask employers what are the skills that somebody needs for a job, and there's a huge gap. So it's only about 56% of new graduates actually are considered employable by these metrics, right? So there's a big gap in what people with only technical skills coming out of formal systems can do in a workplace. And then, we've had decades of research and evidence from economics on, the contribution of kind of cognitive and non-cognitive skills to the workplace and to, economic outcomes of individuals as well as to firms themselves. And so it's gone beyond just does it work? Are they important or not? To which skills are important to different parts of your career, right? So when we think of just early access and getting an opportunity, first opportunity, it's communication, self-efficacy, initiative, and kind of persistence, right? But then when we turn to retention, right, getting past a probation, actually getting the job and staying there for a while, then the soft skills that matter are reliability, teamwork, self-regulation, and emotional management, right? So something's going to make you a good colleague. And then when you actually want to progress, you want to get a raise or you want to get a promotion, it's more like adaptability, learning orientation, problem solving, and leadership skills, right? So there's lots of different soft skills matter, and different soft skills matter at different parts, whether we're bringing somebody into new industries or trying to help them move up in an industry. So we also have good evidence that these skills can be taught. So there's a nice paper from studying the garment sector in India. And so there are women who already have technical skills. They're already trained. They know how to make the products they're supposed to make. But when they gave them soft skill training on top of that, productivity increased by 13.5%. Right? So the returns to the individuals, the returns to the factory as well by actually teaching soft skills. There are programs like this within, on the rural side, mostly the graduation approach, right? So if there's really nice paper coming out of West Africa where they compare, if I just give people in these livelihoods programs business skills, which is the traditional thing to do, or if I give them soft skills, right, one or the other, they actually find that the soft skills are more important in building livelihoods in that sector. Like I said, somebody mentioned already, we're doing an experiment like this in Jharkhand right now with about 10,000 women where we're giving them business skills or business skills plus 2 different kinds of soft skills to figure out if there's an additional return to them. Their incomes, a lot of it is income eventually, but basically, does it carry on from that initial asset that they're given? Are they actually turning it into a stream of income in the future? So I think that, what the only other things to kind of think about here about like why haven't soft skills actually gotten into our curricula sooner? I think part of it is a branding problem that technical seemed like more important, right? But part of it is also that teaching is more experiential. It has to be more experiential, more case-based. Teaching has to change because it's not a subject where we can actually take in a lot of information and give it back. We have to be able to show. And so that's the other thing of, assessment is also important. When can we see somebody has these soft skills? And that also has come a long way. They're accessible, and AI is actually pushing this further, that we have AI tools that can both teach and assess whether someone has developed these kinds of skills.
Thanks so much for, Dr. Sharon, thank you so much for this perspective. I think you rightly said that technical skills also have to be coupled with the soft skills in order to, move up not only in the economic ladder, but on many other fronts, because once you actually gain economic empowerment, you also gain political empowerment. We saw many women in the panchayats and urban local bodies who came for the first time as elected representatives, but then, became economically empowered also. All this empowerment, I think, has some intersectionality. It's not that gaining income would then just restrict it to the gaining income thing. So we have seen many women moving up in the ladder and showing those leadership skills because of these soft skills that they gain through this process. So very important perspective. Dr. Shan, thank you for this. Now I move to Dr. Elena. Now, Dr. Elena comes from Vivigiri National Institute, and she's been working on, like Deepthi was mentioning, and she was saying that she's worked on labor laws also, and on many other things. So with this very revolutionary new labor codes that have come in, it's like, many of us have read it, but, we know what are acts and bylaws, and, it has been notified also. So, but just to understand that, these labor codes, how do they extend social security benefits and insurance to all these workers, especially informal workers? And what are the pathways to operationalize it? I mean, there is an portal where you are actually getting registered, but on the ground, what do you feel that how these benefits are extended to those informal workers, especially women, because you are working in this gender, Center for Gender and Labor, and how these technical platforms are actually able to deliver these safety nets? Do you see them, or do you see there are lots of refinements needed? And what are some key emerging sectors that we talked about, especially on the livelihood sectors that, emerging ones like green transition, care, gig? What are the key opportunities and what kind of challenges do you see for the women workers to access it?
Thank you so much, Anjuji. And first of all, I would express my gratitude to Mahua and NIUA for extending the invite. And it was a pleasure listening to Additional Secretary Sir also on the expectations of this workshop. So the first question which you asked me is on the labor codes. I mean, yes, November 2025 had been historic. We all know about it. And the 4 labor codes came into force, and a lot of changes have happened in the entire legal architecture of the country. And one of the most pressing challenges before the government was extending social security, and that is how the codes came into picture, and a lot of things have been taken care of. Now, coming to urban scenario and women and informality, this becomes a perennial question for all of us who are working on policy research or academia or policymakers themselves. It's a big question that with massive informality, more than 80% of workers in the informal sector, looking into women's employment equally in the informal sector, what are the opportunities for them in terms of employment, sustenance in employment, and at the same time, extension of social security and the labor regulations to them. So, and at the same time, one of the important prominent questions is on upward mobility. Whether are we envisaging a legal architecture which promotes upward mobility as well or not? So these are some of the questions we need to ponder over and understand. So some statistics before you to understand the entire
the scenario and where the labor codes come into the picture, is that looking into urban employment for women, we all know, most of us in this room who are working on employment or skilling would know that women's employment had been lower over PLFS rounds, and with the latest PLFS, we see there is an increase happening. When the PLFS started, we saw an increase happening, but the increase had been mostly in self-employment, and urban employment for women had not been increasing at that pace. So it's now, if you look into the latest statistics, it is 27.7% for women in urban India in employment, labor force participation. At the same time, the broad industrial distribution of women where they are located in urban areas is services, manufacturing and construction. And if we look into further disaggregation of these sectors, we see they're into low-end processes. For example, if I say manufacturing for women, it is mostly textile or food processing, which are low-end sectors. So there is where the challenge before the government was that can we extend social security to workers who are on contractual employment, who are not on regular contracts. And at the same time, when we look into employment contracts per se, now, thankfully, it has been increasing slowly, but women having employment contract for more than 3 years is very less. So regular employment contracts are low. That is why the labor codes, that is where the labor codes come into picture, where the government under the IR code introduced the fixed term employment. Now, the fixed term employment regularizes employment contracts to a large extent. So it not only is a step towards promoting formalization, it also promotes regular social security access. For example, the moment women are into fixed term contracts, they would be eligible for maternity and proportionate gratuity. So that is the immediate benefit which they are going to get. So that is what we have in the labor codes now presently on the fixed term employment thing, which I see as a major game changer actually in not only regularizing contracts, but also boosting female labor force participation, and also this regularizing the sectors, the low end sectors where women are in. Located. Apart from that, one of the recommendations in the Parliamentary Standing Committee on OSH, Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions Code, was the micro, small, medium industries. And the Parliamentary Standing Committee recommended that the Maternity Benefit Act already had talked about creche facilities long time back when we had the amendment and 61 Act. 50 people are there, then you have to have a creche facility. But then what about MSMEs? Can they afford? What about that? So in the Parliamentary Standing Committee report on OSH, it was very clearly highlighted, and in the OSH code, the Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions Code, they introduced a common creche facilities where cluster of industries can pool in resources to set up a common creche. This is also one of the important incentives for women who are working, who are going for employment or who would be engaged in certain sectors which are women-driven centers or larger concentration. For example, in urban areas, we see most of the migrant workers in these sectors with the broad industry division. So that is also one of the indicators, but I see now the implementation part. You were also asking me about the implementation. How do we implement? So in the OSH code also, they also talked about the transportation facilities for women who are working at night shifts. That also boosts female labor force participation to a large extent. But then how do we materialize that? How do we make it a reality? And that in the code it is mentioned that the employers would be providing pick and drop facility. But within the task force on improving female labor force participation, there were discussions happening. And that day when in 2024, when the first report of the task force, that was the advisory to the employers, was released at Bharat Mandapam, there were two ministries. This was one of the ministries, Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, and the Ministry of Road Transport was there. So there were discussions. They were also issuing advisories for women in safety, construction, all of these sectors, manufacturing, for safety instructions, for transportation, all of that. So some discussions are underway, definitely. We keep on, in our own research at VV National Labour Institute, keep on talking about these interministerial convergences now for making the transportation facility happen. And maybe some discussions with the state road transport corporations for making it a reality with some relief on the employers of small-scale sectors. So these are some of the implementation aspects which really need to be looked at. And I would also like to highlight, since you asked me on the e-Shram thing, the registration. E-Shram, as we all know in this room and everywhere across the world, in G20, the BRICS South African Presidency 2023, it was celebrated there. And we had a team coming to understand about the e-Shram of Government of India. So e-Shram portal registers unorganized workers, links them to social security schemes. Now looking into urban employment, looking into sustenance of women in urban employment, which has got a massive chunk of population coming from migration per se, and its whole family migration happening, and it's vulnerable employment which is being generated. e-Shram holds a big potential actually in terms of if we leverage the data, looking into intersectionalities of the data. I'll just share one of my experiences with the Bihar government on an ILO project recently on domestic workers, where the Bihar government was using e-Shram data to disseminate social security provisions of the state to the domestic workers. So now we need also to look into the data set in a more nuanced manner. For example, looking in informality status, their histories of marginalization, their caste status, income profiles, everything for targeted interventions actually. And skilling programs have to be oriented accordingly. Our social security provisions need to be oriented accordingly with specific targeted beneficiaries if we know the life situations of these people. So the reasons for migration, like the 2021 PLFS report very clearly highlighted on migration that women migrate for marriage and men migrate for employment. So it is very important to understand the reasons for migration, for urban employment, looking into urban employment for future, what kind of employment they are ready to, prepared to, whether they have access to regular social security provisions which are at par with the backgrounds they're coming from. That is very important. And also leveraging e-Shram data, which need to be more disaggregated and nuanced and more, the data need to be sectorally disaggregated for state governments to have good policies. Every state has some good policies. That needs to be, disseminated to the larger population. So that I see a possibility. e-Shram and labor codes go hand in hand actually, and that's how most of the schemes are implemented. So that is one of the possibilities. And lastly, the emerging sectors which you asked me. I see the challenges which holds back women in urban areas or even in any employment they're coming to has been your unpaid care work. So more than 5 hours in unpaid domestic services women are engaged in, and more than 2.5 hours in unpaid caregiving services they're engaged in, mostly in childcare, instruction and elderly care. So we need to configure our employment scenario with other key access to infrastructure, energy, water, other indicators which are a part of urban development agenda actually, so that women are not constrained to participate in the labor market and they have everything in place for promoting free access. I would say women's agency actually to have this. And the emerging sectors where we have the green economy or the care economy, which is one of the prominent sectors engaging women, need to also take care of care workers. So it is very important to recognize certified care workers and the care economy per se, and also look into policies which address unpaid care work to facilitate women's smooth transition into the labor market. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Arena, for a very, gendered perspective of, on employment and labor, that some sectors draw more women into the employment than, many other, and as other speakers were also saying, and, what are the enabling conditions required to increase the female labor force participation. Thanks very much. I would move to our last speaker, Divya. Divya, considering that you've been working with CEW and especially on the green jobs, this is a very important sector, as you heard from the panelist also. One is that how this green economy is adding most jobs, especially in the tier 2 and 3 cities, and CEW has been working with many states and cities. What are the biggest challenges in planning the city spaces so that these jobs are easily accessible to the poor, rather than repeating older patterns of exclusion? And, when we talk about workers, though we touched upon many dimensions of skilling, etc., but I think city planning is very important, that when you plan for the cities, it is again not infrastructure, it is also that how cities include informal workers and people. So what is your, experience of working with the city, especially when heat action plans were made, and that looking at the, these kind of emergencies when happen, that how then informal workers come in, and it should not be seen more as, it should not be seen just as, some crisis happens and then we respond, but overall, throughout the year, how inclusivity of cities can be strengthened. So, and you can share your examples of CEW because those come from the cities. Over to you, Divya.
Thank you, ma'am, for the question, and thank you to Mahua and NIUA for bringing all of us together to talk about urban resilience and livelihoods from multiple lenses. I think climate resilience is very similar to how Dr. Sharon put that soft skills is a branding problem. I think climate resilience is also not mainstream yet. It doesn't come into our main thinking yet. It's often an afterthought. And for decades we have debated, can growth be also sustainable, or there will always be a trade-off, right? So I structure my answer in 3 parts largely. One is to put some perspective, what are we losing today? When we say that there is rising heat stress, the workers are not protected enough, then what is the opportunity at the other hand? What are some solutions that we have seen on ground? And how can we possibly scale them? So with respect to what are we losing today, it's not even in future, now climate change is costing us jobs. So already there is a study that exists that says that we will lose 4.5% of our GDP, which means that we'll lose some 35 million jobs. We are talking here about creating jobs, but simultaneously we're losing jobs to crises like heat. Already 75% of our workforce is under threat. That is about 380 million workers today. Mostly informal workers are under the threat of heat risk. In 2024, we lost about 247 billion hours, potential labor hours to heat. So those are the numbers. And since we're talking a lot about informal workers and they comprise the largest proportion, they are 17 times more vulnerable to formal workers, only because of the missing cooling autonomy. So those are the stats that we're looking at. And this becomes critical because today, very few cities, those who even choose to spend, are spending less than 2 to 3% of their budget on climate resilient infrastructure. And World Bank study estimates that India needs about $2.4 trillion in investments to build climate resilient infrastructure. So that's the gap we are talking about. Now, let's talk about hope, because that is what drives us in most cases. Our study, CW study, also estimates that the green economy will create about 48 million jobs, of which through clean energy alone, there will be about 4.4 million jobs, which is 43% of it is driven by rooftop solar itself. And as Sir also quoted, 40% of these jobs will be in tier 2, tier 3 cities. And what green economy does is also that one is direct jobs, but it also opens up the potential for micro-entrepreneurship. So more and more rooftop installations happen. So you have more and more micro-entrepreneurs emerging for repair, maintenance, etc. For circular economy, there is a huge potential to have micro-entrepreneurs for segregation, aggregation, refurbishing, etc. Right, so that's how green economy can enable livelihoods and micro-entrepreneurship as well. And like you said, that this is not just an economic problem, this is also a spatial problem. So today, most of the rooftop projects might exist 1 hour away from where an informal worker stays. And Dr. Sharon also pointed out that green sector is mainly masculine. It is largely because of the missing infrastructure at the site, and because these jobs are not proximate to where the workers live. A waste management facility will be on the outskirts of the city, while the worker is living in the city. And it becomes also, like, women are more so vulnerable to these, in these scenarios, because mobility is constrained in that sense. So today, the planning that needs to embed this kind of thinking is missing. And so therefore, if you're talking about green economy as a large potential to create more and more jobs, we also need to plan with it. Right, so now what has been happening is heat waves has been recognized as a disaster that is welcoming, and it was in 2024. And in that process, CEW has launched we are working on developing heat action plans for about 300 cities. And while traditionally heat action plans are focused on health and disaster only, we're also bringing in the livelihoods perspective. How can we build better for gig workers? How can we build more, how can we plan better with respect to enabling more and more green jobs? Even as they have been recognized as disaster, only 10% of the budget can be spent towards heat waves related activities, and it's more in response, like you said, it's more in emergency response than planning. But infrastructure requires a lot more planning than just emergency response. And in fact, in Ahmedabad, when the city implemented its heat action plan, they saw that the heat-related deaths went down by 25%. So that's the impact if we are able to implement the heat action plans. There are also other examples that are emerging from ground. For example, in Jodhpur, Jodhpur Municipal Corporation, along with Mahila Housing Trust and Natural Resource Defense Council, have together built a net zero cooling station, which is a very low-cost infrastructure that they have developed on the principle of wind tower ventilation, evaporative cooling, and reflective cooling, which brings down the ambient temperature by 8 to 12 degrees. And it can accommodate up to 40 workers at a time. So, and this is already being replicated by Jaipur as well, and in multiple cities. So can we also look at enabling such low-cost infrastructure as well, which can help the workers during their work hours? There's also, because we've been talking a lot about ensuring workers, there's a very interesting example in context of women, which is by Self-Employment Women's Association, SEVA, where they're working with a product called parametric insurance, health insurance, and to over 50,000 informal workers, they've done this payout that whenever temperatures go beyond 40 degrees, women are compensated by rupees 400. And that is helpful because workers are losing their productivity and work hours because of rising heat. But now the premium doesn't have to be paid by the worker. We, the welfare boards, the governments, the institutions have to figure out mechanisms on how we could enable that premium for the workers. So these are, and in context of cooling, the street vendors, the vegetable vendors, fruit vendors also lose out on their produce. They have to do distress selling at the end of the day because they do not have adequate cooling solutions. So can evaporative cooling solutions, cart side solutions, portable solutions be embedded into the vending infrastructure? So these are some examples, and now how can we potentially scale these? And my recommendation is three-part. One is that we plan and we invest well. So planning, of course, we need to enable climate resilient infrastructure, and it will not alone happen if we have just 10% budget allocated. That too it is towards an emergency driven response. Can city budgets consider this as a capital investment rather than as an emergency response? So can we plan that way? Second is, when we're saying plan, can we also have livelihood impact assessment potential to all the projects that are coming up with respect to green jobs? If let's say a rooftop installation has to happen in a certain urban space, can we also figure out where the housing for the workers would be, how the transports would be enabled, etc.? Can that also be integrated? So can we have livelihood impact assessment potential as a part of the planning that happens for any green project? So that's one. Second is protecting the workers. So like Sir said, that it doesn't have to be collateral-based lending, it has to be cash flow-based lending. But also what we have seen working with financiers, there is a need for creating awareness on viability of green projects. Today, a lot of financiers do not understand fully what is the viability and is this worth lending for me. So can we work towards creating that awareness, enabling those viable models? Plus also, can we ensure our workers, can we scale models like parametric insurance for workers to help them ensure their livelihoods as the heat is rising? Finally, the third recommendation is, because of course, I've also been an MEL expert and I come from a think tank, is that can we measure and track effectively? Today, there are no dashboards. In fact, we recently launched this study, CEW NRDC, on clean energy jobs potential, and we see that there is a missing data on how many workers are actually involved in green jobs. Can there be dashboards, data dashboards, which also have how many jobs are being created in green sectors, how these jobs are being planned, etc. So can we measure and track these effectively so that we are able to integrate them more and more? So that's about it from my end. I think with every degree of warming in the temperature, it's like a liability on the productivity of our most vulnerable workers. And that's what we need to remember. But on the other side, there is also a 48 million job opportunities sitting right there that we can leverage to protect our workers and make our labor markets thrive. So yeah, let's focus on that and let's make climate resilience mainstream. Thank you.
Thank you, Divya. Thank you so much. Very insightful, and thought-provoking, especially when you plan the cities. And sometimes cities, and most of the times you see cities are planned in silos. You don't look at, this livelihood as well as infrastructure together. This is very useful because we've been also struggling that many buildings that were created earlier, and if you want to make them climate resilient, like our, these, social infrastructure, some shelters that we built under day NULM. So, you can actually retrofit only, you cannot, completely destroy them and, make them new. So those are the challenges we also feel, and I think you rightly pointed out that, very deeper lens is required and a lot of efforts are needed when you look at the city planning to bring in the livelihood perspective. So thank you so much. We can open the floor for question and answers. And we can take some if you have, we can see some hands raising. Jeevan, can we take, what you can do is you frame your question and let the panel know that you're targeting at a panelist, or it is a general question also, so you can do that. So we have a question, yeah, Jeevan, you can go ahead. And then.
Okay, so very good evening all of you. So very interesting and enriching and eye-opening discussion. So my first question, there is a couple of questions for 2-3 speakers. So first question will be for the Sharon. So basically, what behavior factor decide if a male youth actually join in the care sector? As per the PLFS, 71% of the care worker in the female will be there. What kind of behavioral factor decide whether the male will shift for the care sector vis-a-vis their traditional work, or even if the female youth transfer or the actually join in the construction or kind of you say that transport sector, because PLFS also say that only 1% of the female only join in this sector. This is the first question. Second question coming to the Elena. Dr. Elena, you have as per the labor code, now largely cover the gig and the platform work for the social security. So what steps we actually make for the e-Shram card or translate into the hospital cash transfer where integrated with the Ayushman card or the pension for the women home-based workers. So this is the question for the Dr. Elena. Divya, as we have already know that heat is now 4.5% of our GDP risk is there now. Summer is not a problem, it is going to be a risk. So can you share some of the example where the CW has already experimented where the city budget actually traded heat and as an economic risk and protected work productivity apart from the Ahmedabad, because the Ahmedabad parametric address, the Seva Bank has already done, apart from the Ahmedabad, wherever your work is there, so it will be enlightened us. Thank you all.
Okay. Yeah, so basically the question is just on two sides of the same problem, right? What gets somebody to cross the boundary? So I'm not trying to say that money doesn't matter. Money does matter, right? That's one thing. But on the behavioral side of it, I think a lot of it is role models, right? That role models can actually be projected, right? It doesn't have to necessarily mean that it's a role model in your neighborhood, right? But the right role model for, for you, right? And role models depend on the question and they depend on the opportunity. But, somebody who is working in the care economy because, this sounds like not so nice, but who, to me, how do you make the care economy sound masculine, right? When it's labeled the care economy because we think of it as women's work, right? And so I think it's, kind of developing a new identity around the physical strength that's required to do a lot of jobs in the care sector, right? Like people are moving human bodies day in and day out, to change beds and bathe people and things like that. There's actually a lot of physical strength that's required for lots of parts of the care economy. And so I think it's kind of making those things salient, right? Using role models, targeted role models, which we can do now because of social media, right? And so, on the women's side, it's the same thing. Like, how do you make something seem acceptable to them, and that it doesn't mean that you're kind of taking risks, right? That you don't care about your safety, right? It's just that you are a strong, capable person who knows how to manage your safety in a new environment, right? And so, I think kind of what we're just starting to talk about now is really broad, large-scale campaigns about social norms. That it's, we do see government interested in this now, and philanthropical interest in this now, of really just trying to, think of some sophisticated ways to push these boundaries, which are not necessarily related to one scheme at a time, one question, one problem at a time, but kind of really bigger picture, like how are we going to unlock some of these norms, particularly for women. And, we do have evidence that, we don't just have to wait for them to happen naturally. We know that norms do change naturally over time, across places, right? Like none of us are stuck in time anywhere in this world. But we also have, a growing body of evidence that norms actually can be shaped proactively through communication campaigns, role modeling, things like that.
Thank you so much for the question. I think I can see your question in two parts. One is you asked me about the gig and platform workers schemes and how it is disseminated and how e-Shram and Ayushman Bharat are linked together, and how, whether there is a linkage or not. So looking into gig and platform workers, social security dissemination, if you see this year's union budget, there's separate allocation for schemes, and ESIC is very much a part of it. I'm not in the right stage now to talk about it because the scheme is not yet rolled out. The government is very keenly working on the scheme, which includes definitely hospitalization, and ESIC plays a major role actually in this, and that is being rolled out as a part of the labor codes and also the budgetary thing. Apart from that, social security for all other workers, which I missed during my intervention earlier, through sectoral welfare boards. the Social Security Fund, which is created now, I mean, which has got funding from multiple sources, including penalty amount, including other 1 to 2% of turnover from aggregators, then other social security from the government and other funding sources. So it is a multiple source of funding which would be used to design social security schemes at the state level through welfare boards, welfare schemes, like the BOCW model, the Building and Other Construction Workers Welfare Model. Similarly, sectoral schemes can be rolled up, I mean, will be rolled up definitely after the rules are finalized by all the states now. So the states are now working on the rules, and I'm sure they'll come out with these schemes. Linking the eShram with iShram, after worker gets registered with eShram, at least more than 17 schemes the person is linked to altogether, including Ayushman Bharat. So you have the eShram card, you get linked to PIMSIM, you get linked to Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Vikas Yojana and all other plethora of more than 17 government schemes. So eShram is at a stage of actually taking, moving forward, I would say. And apart from being a database or social security platform, it also tells us a lot of stories about workers if the data can be leveraged, again and again I'm saying that, for larger research and evidence-based policy making. So we'll have a good source now, and I see a lot of potential with eShram now, with the linking of this through the various schemes of the government.
Thank you, sir, for the question. Enabling budget, I think, is the hardest part, in addition to these heat action plans. We've been working very closely with Thane Municipal Corporation, and last year we were able to convince the municipal corporation to allocate 1 CR additionally in their plan to implement their heat action plan. We have also been working with Tamil Nadu government in multiple districts and in Odisha as well. However, there is also a challenge of gap in the awareness. Sometimes we have seen or we've heard from the leadership in multiple states, and in one of the personal examples when I spoke about the work that we're doing towards heat resilience is that कितने लोग आज की डेट में हीट से मर रहे हैं, इससे ज़्यादा तो ट्रैफिक से मरते हैं, right? So how is this a urgent problem for us to act on rather than other problems, right? So the team has been working towards enabling that awareness, and even on that we have partnered with influencers. We've taken that approach where we've partnered with influencers, celebrities who can talk about these measures like parametric insurance, heat action plans, etc., so that there is more widespread awareness and more budget allocation happens. But so far what we have seen is we've seen some progress in Thane, but of course 1 crore is not enough given the scope that is out there, and more philanthropic funding also needs to be mobilized. So that's where we are in terms of progress.
Niharika, you had a question?
Yeah, thank you. My question is for Mr. Meena. Sir, you mentioned about repayment by the informal workers to be cash flow based. So one is that the portfolio itself might run into multi-crores, and the banks are always wary of their portfolio running into NPAs. So, I mean, being a banker, what is your take on it? How feasible it is going to be?
It is feasible in the sense, if you are making this cash flow based, means the customer will not default, because the cash flow, when the cash flow is there, he is making the payment and you are making the repayment cycle as per his cash flow. So you are meeting the requirement of the customer and aligning it to the capacity to pay, so the level of NPA will come down if it is made cash flow based. And second thing, the assessment will also be better in case of cash flow based funding. Traditional method is not exactly assessing the exact repayment capacity of the customer, but if you know that one person is earning 50,000 rupees a month, so based on that only you are giving the credit. And based on that cycle that he is making, he is getting more payment in the first quarter, not in the second quarter, then again in the third quarter. So you are aligning your repayment period or repayment installment as per his cash flow. You are making higher repayment, you are asking higher repayment in the first quarter, lesser in second quarter, then again more in third quarter. So based on his cash flow, maybe some seasonal industry or sometime the workers also do not work in the very extreme heat time or the cold time, so their cash flow will be lower. So based on their repayment capacity, you can fix the repayment cycle, and he is paying that, so NPA will definitely come down. So it will decrease the repayment problem of a finance institution. It is feasible.
More questions? Can we take one? Yeah, Ashwin.
Oh, thank you for such a wonderful conversations. I'm Anshuman Karul from Participatory Research in Asia. So we are working at the intersection of water and SHGs in Jodhpur and Ajmer. We are also having an interaction with the state government in Rajasthan. So I want to know that what is happening now with the National Urban Livelihood Mission, because when this program came to an end and the bank, RBI has written to all the banks that this financial linkage needs to be stopped. So it is taken by the cities, that by the municipal corporation, the NULM units within the corporations, that now the scheme is over and they are not stopped supporting the SHG groups. But this is we have created a lot of this ecosystem of SHGs across the country. This needs to be leveraged not only for the with the Amrut 2.0 or maybe 3.0 now, with the Ayushman Bharat, but many other such provisions you are talking about, like how to localize these heat action plans, how to create that awareness, and think this is the opportunity we need to catch up. So how we are going to take up this forward? Otherwise we are going to lose this huge network of SHGs.
So I think that is best that I answer. So, it's a very, very, very pertinent question that you are asking, concern in fact, but that is what we are saying, that, this is the SHGs that were created under the NULM are being leveraged in various other schemes. So Amrut Mitra is one. We are also supporting SHGs in various other government programs, whether it is through SBM within the ministry, also with, other programs of other ministries. So that is something that, because it's not that the scheme has stopped or not, but we had this human capital there and a lot of awareness on whether, in fact, a very recent example is about, engaging our SHGs into MNRE work, making them or creating that skill to become the solar DDs, like the way you were pointing out. So we see there are lots of opportunities there, and that kind of role is still being played by the ministry with other ministries. It's not that those groups are redundant, but they are actually taking up these jobs. And considering this emerging livelihood opportunities, we are also mindful of that, and therefore we are converging with various ministries. And the key is this whole of government approach that we are, embracing and seeing that, how these poor workers are getting various opportunities in other programs and missions. So if there are no more questions, we can end. I think we are right on time. I think, sir. So Deepthi, over to you for your further instructions.
Thank you, Anju, for steering such a rich and wide-ranging conversation. Thank you to each of our speakers who joined in today. Let me try to just capture very briefly what I think we are taking away from the session. I think the way forward calls for a collaborative ecosystem. Government setting enabling conditions, financial institutions innovating, civil society to reach the last mile, and platforms creating accessible entry points. I think what gives us hope from the evidence that was shared today, that change is possible at scale. So let's take that as a message from the session. On behalf of NIUA and MAHUA and the entire organizing team, I would like to thank Shri Satinder Pal Singh for chairing this session, and to Ms. Anju Dwivedi for her moderation. I think we would like to thank each of our speakers who joined in today. We would like to thank you with a very small memento, and if I could request Shri Satinder Pal Singh ji to please present the mementos. to Dr. Elena Samantroy. To Dr. Sharon Barnard. To Shri S.R. Meena. Thank you. Could I request Shri Sunil Kumar Yadav, Director, Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, to present the memento to Ms. Divya Gaur? To Dr. Sakshi Khurana. Could I request everyone to just come together for a group photograph? Thank you everyone who has joined in the audience, and thank you all of them who joined us online as well for your engagement.